We can close it later. Yeah. I'm well. I'm well.
Good evening, everybody.
Good
Welcome.
evening.
Hey there.
How are you?
Hey, Harvey. What's
Hi.
the weather? What's the weather like up there? And What?
Today was nice. It was about 55 and totally sunny.
well, it's not much different weather here. It's pretty cold, pretty cool out here tonight, Santa Clarita. It's probably about
Hey,
40,
Rabbi.
45. What's the weather like there, John?
It is, we are on Waikiki Island, and here you can take a quick look, and it is cool. About 61, 62, 55, I don't know. Beautiful day.
Isn't it supposed to be warmer?
Well, it's going to be boiling in Sydney. It's 40 degrees Celsius right now. But here it's nice.
All right.
Hi,
Um,
everyone.
hello, Joyce.
Hey, Joyce.
Joyce, Joyce, you
That is
made it
Joyce.
online.
I'm sorry.
You made it online.
Yes, I did. I
Joyce,
not good at driving down there alone at night.
No, but
Joyce, Glory says hello.
Hi, guys. Hi, Glory. Hi, John. Hi, Kelly and Philip and Harvey and Cheryl and David. All my friends. I love you guys.
Well, we all love you,
Many
Joyce.
people in
Thank you.
And we got people joining us, not just all around the country, but all around the world right now.
Wow.
We have people joining us. We have people joining us all around the world. We're just putting ourselves up on Facebook right now, and hopefully that's working. And I haven't gone into the sanctuary yet, where we've got people already ready to go, but let me just make sure we're streaming correctly for those who are
the room.
going to want to join us there. We are live. We are on screen. We are going to do some exciting new stuff tonight. So it is warm. It's warm in here, but we were just discussing with everybody online that it is.
So Mark,
Yes.
you're about my kid's age, right?
Yes.
So you know what this is?
Yeah.
Okay. I know what it is. Yes, they're all.
What do you think? I mean, Ronnie's got a record, a shirt with a record label. I mean, with a record,
That 45.
45 insert. Yeah. Asking me if I knew what it was. Of course. We had, we have that.
Another question, is this younger than you grow?
2 years younger. She's 2 years younger, but she would know that too. So we got a bunch of people here tonight, which is wonderful. We've got the Nathans who are not normal goers.
Normal.
They're not normal.
Who are you calling normal?
I didn't.
Not
say
regulars.
That was Michael. Yes, they're not normal for Wednesday nights. They're very, very regular people.
You're regular.
They're regular for Tuesday. They're regular for Tuesday.
Ah,
They're not regular for Wednesday, but they're here tonight. And we got a weird thing, the way things went out, the way this schedule happened this year. Yeah, we're starting something tonight and then we're going to be on hiatus for a couple of weeks while I'm out of town. But, what? Hiatus, yeah, that's right, hiatus. So yeah, till the first week of January, yeah, till January. But so if we had finished Deuteronomy tonight, that would have been perfect time. But it's okay because I want to give people a little taste, a little idea of what we're going to be doing. And the first part of Pirke Avot, the opening chapter we're going to do today is going to be interesting. So Mike just asked the question, how long ago did we study Pirke Avot? Because we did, except it was the Wednesday night classes of about 14, 15 years ago. I think it was actually, you're right, it might have even been 16 years ago. It might have been 07, which would be 16 years ago. Yes. Yeah. So we did start the Talmud about 16 years ago. We went through Pirke Avot first, and then we went through Brachot, which is the first tractate. And we went through the first tractate, and that's about, people couldn't do much more than that. And the reason is that it's very dense and it's a lot of stuff. And it's not that we don't, it's not that we can't study the Talmud, but it takes another level of intensity. And to some extent, like the way that many people study it is through what's called the Daf Yomi cycle, which is a page a day. Daf Yomi means a day, a page per day. And what? With a study partner or partners, which means you study in a group. And it's a page, but it's double-sided page. So it's page A and page B. So every page of Talmud has a side and a B side. Speaking of records, by the way, we call it A and B side. Yeah, you never know what's on the B side. The B side can be better than the A side, which is the same thing with records, but that's John. He's in New Zealand, which is why it's daytime. It's only John and Gloria there. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning there. They are actually they are there. It's a long story, but John is making his presence known already in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah,
So
we're 21 hours ahead. So
Yeah.
it's 3 o'clock.
yeah,
No, 4
so
o'clock. 4 o'clock.
it's easier to work backwards, just subtract the hours than add them. But anyways, it's tomorrow. It's tomorrow. Sorry, they're well into tomorrow. They can tell you what happened too. How did the market do today?
Yada, yada, yada.
It did well today. Anyways,
My stocks were up too.
yes.
mine,
I just asked. You don't have to get defensive. Congratulations. Everyone is congratulating you here. Okay, Doreen is congratulating you, but we're all congratulating John for the Pasha Award. So,
Oh, thank you again very much. I tell you, I was really not feeling good that night at all. So I was asleep, and I saw Philip come on, and I go, "Wow, Philip's watching Shabbat. How awesome is that?"
so you still didn't know when you
Thank
saw
you very
him.
much.
Well, we kept
No,
you
I-
off. We kept you off of the Zoom until then because we were a little worried that you would see that. But
Yeah, it was
yeah,
good.
it was.
Thank you very much.
It was a
I'm honored.
technical. We had to do a lot of technical stuff in order to get you on, but it was well worth it.
You did a great job.
And we got it. We got it on. We brought him in. So we hadn't done that before, but and I wouldn't recommend that we do the award for someone who can't be there, but what can you do? That's when we give it out on Hanukkah. So we did do it once at our house for the vodka latke party, which is tomorrow to remind people. But they weren't going to be able to be there for that, so we couldn't do that. But we did do that with somebody once who couldn't be at the Friday night service. So we did it at the vodka latke, and that winner I think was actually, who was that? I got at our house. Who was it? Does anyone remember? Who was it?
Marcia. I mean, excuse me.
I remember.
Marcia
Hope so.
took it for the family.
No.
For the concert of the Lord.
Lori. Yeah.
That was
Lori.
last year.
It was last year?
Yeah.
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Oh, last year.
Really?
Yes. You'll see, she's gonna be giving it out.
Oh, okay. Anyways, I want to tell you that it was a great honor to be able to have all the winners that we had, and we were able to be there. We had a good turnout Friday. So I will tell you that, bless you, that tonight being the seventh night of Hanukkah, we're going to light the menorah real quick. Just remind me that we're going to bless you. We're going to do that. So we're going to light the menorah real quick. And we get the what's it called? I'm going to get the camera up. I'm going to get the camera up there so everyone can see it. Because we have one more night. We have one more night of Hanukkah after tonight, which we'll be lighting tomorrow night at our house. Whoa, it's not stopping. You need to stop, lighter. Okay. So, no, I got it. Thank you. Okay. So here's our menorah. And here it is.
Yeah.
Wait, why is it going here? Yeah, here we go. There it is. All right, folks. So we're gonna light it tonight and have a chance. Last night, or 2 nights ago, we lit it. We had our gun safety, and that worked really well to be able to have everybody here. That we had about 20 people that came out for that discussion, which the firearm safety, I think people were able to kind of learn something. And I think Richard shared some really important information, not least of which is that the best thing to do when confronted by somebody is to run away. And he made that very clear. Yeah. You're right. You're looking at it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna light it from. Well, I guess I'll light it. I'll light it from here. But it's I can't think about how the people that are looking at us will see it.
Well, they'll see it.
It's reversed. Is it? Yeah, I don't know. I think so. Like, all right, so let's light the Hanukkah lights, and then again tomorrow night for those who can join us for vodka and latke. My wife is at home right now baking latkes, frying latkes, baking. She's frying them. She's frying them. There will be some baked ones for people who are not good with oil, but yeah, most of them are homemade and made in oil. So we'll do the candles, the candle blessings, everybody. The candle listen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. And the second blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim lavoteinu bayamim hahem bazman Hazeh Ma'osur Yeshuati Lechana El Shabeya Tikon Beit Tefilati Vesham Toda Nezabeya Leitakin Matbeach Mitzaram Nabeach Azegmor Beshir Mizmor Hanukat HaMizbeach Azegmor Beshir Mizmor Hanukat HaMizbeach. And there we go. Thank you. It's time for us to study. And the Shamas candle, the helper candle, is the candle that is not the candle for the miracles. It's the candle to help us study by, read by. You can imagine our ancestors studying Talmud wherever they lived by the lights, but you're not supposed to use those lights for studying. You're not supposed to use those lights for anything other than pursue mitzvah, the nes, the mitzvah of proclaiming the miracle, right? But the Shamas candle is the candle you're actually using for that light, right?
My dad told me, when you let a Yisro cancel, if you have to go into the kitchen, turn the light on. Don't use it.
As a light, yeah. You're not supposed to use the light for what it's meant to be. And so the Shamas candle is the one that allows us. That's the utility candle. And I've explained that because, look, originally they didn't have candles. You didn't need a candle to light another candle because they didn't have candles. They had a wick. You take the wick out and light it. The wick for the shamash was the utility candle, which is what shamash means, utility. It's where the word shamas, the person who was the utility helper. Yeah, the person who helped at the synagogue. In Hebrew, shimush means utility or usage. So is mine. And the shamas was essentially like the synagogue janitor, by the way. It's the person who turned on the lights, who kept the lights on and would make sure everything was ready for chairs were set up so people could do it. No, the Shabbos goy would be doing stuff that you couldn't do on Shabbos, but the Shabbos was the one who kept the synagogue going. And sometimes the job entailed, asking for money and kind of being the synagogue functionary. The Gabbai would also help out during the service, right? But the Shamas really kept the synagogue functioning as a building, as a making sure that the place was able to some extent, be on.
My grandfather wanted to be shaman, that way he could temple all the time.
Wow.
And study.
Yeah.
And that's what he did.
Our family looked at it, and I don't know that it was accurate, was more that like my great grandfather made extra money that way. But I'm not sure that that's really the case. I'd like to say that it was more like because he wanted to be in shul. But yeah, those were the people who could be counted on to be that. And it was interesting because we honored Michael Carland gave him a special award because he's really kind of like our Shabbos.
Yeah.
Not our, people would say like a Shabbos goy. He's not, because he actually does stuff all the time, not just on Shabbos. He's here all the time making sure. So for the first time, we've really had a shamas, a person who's able to do that, which is different than a shamus. A shamus is a private eye or a detective, right? Shamus, which I thought at some point was like connected, but it turns out it's actually more like Irish. It's like a shamus because the guy's Irish name, but I always thought it was kind of cool that Shamash and Shamus were both helpers. But a helper, it's really interesting because the helper in Judaism is the one that gets to be elevated, not because it's better than anything else, but because it helps, right? And because it's the one that's helping everybody else. And that's why it's elevated, not because it's better or richer or more powerful, but that it is the one that is the helper. And that's what we really have to elevate, the people who help us. Doesn't have to be. No, you're absolutely right, John. Does not have to be elevated. It oftentimes is, right? because you need to at least identify what it is. And so if they're all on the same level and you're not really sure which one is,
That's different level.
or if it's on the same level, it has to be separated, right? It has to be off to the side so you can actually tell. So you're supposed to tell. And by the way, it doesn't have to be one. You can have 2 shamases.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
you
Why
could.
do they make so many that are like U-shaped? And they're supposed to all be on one level?
Well, they're not supposed to be, yes, they're not supposed to be on different levels. Artistically, people have kind of played around with that. I think nowadays you see most of them are on one level, but I think it was more of an artistic thing. People especially did like the kind of tree of life ones, you know, where there was like a tree in the different branches. It's a little bit based on the idea that the original menorah in the temple looked like branches and looked like a tree. But the menorah in the temple pretty clearly is like all the same level. But they like that idea that it's kind of like branches, like a tree.
When we were at the Shalom House, they had a Dodger.
A Dodger one?
It was a bat. I
Uh-huh.
was gonna buy it, but it was too long. It was a bat that had, handles for it.
It was actually a bat.
It was a bat and had the Dodger
Yeah.
logo on it. It's like, it was just too much of that.
I learned something about Hanukkah this week.
What?
That the 5th day of Hanukkah can never be on Shabbos.
Because of,
It's the way calendar.
yeah, but because the way the calendar is laid out.
So that Quran can't be on Shabbos. It can't be on Friday and
And
Sunday.
yeah, and Passover can't be on Passover's first day. The first day of Passover can't be on a Saturday. It can't start on a Saturday because you wouldn't be able to cook.
Oh, so it could be on
It can't be a Friday. It can be a Friday. It
Right.
can't be a Saturday. Can't start on a Saturday.
You know, it starts this year on my birthday.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm
Nice.
glad this is mine.
Yeah, this year Passover is so late that it's about a month after Easter. So we don't come anywhere close, though Christmas and Hanukkah this next year will be on the same day. They start on the same day. So that's an interesting overlap. But as we showed people, Hanukkah, I mentioned last week, interestingly is not mentioned really in the Talmud very much. It's not. Rabbis had a problem with it. Now, this is the layout of the Mishnah. And let me just explain the difference for a quick second, just to remind everybody. The Mishnah is the commentary that the rabbis wrote over a couple of centuries. And we're talking about 300 or 400 years. The Mishnah was edited. Yeah, and we're going to look at it in a second because we're actually going to look at the Mishnah rabbis. The Mishnaic rabbis, who we call the Tanaim, which are, again, the teachers, the original group of teachers, those teachers taught from about 200 BCE to 200 of the Common Era. The cutoff is kind of easy to know because the last rabbis who edited the Mishnah, the last ones, they kind of sealed it and they made it the Mishnah. And anyone who came after that was no longer a Tana, that they were now part of the second group of rabbis that we call the Amoraim. And the Amoraim were responsible for what we call the Gemara. Now, the Mishnah is divided into 6 sections, and it's written in Hebrew. The Mishnah has Aramaic in it too, but it's primarily written in Hebrew, a Hebrew that we actually call Mishnaic Hebrew. It's the Hebrew that was spoken at the time of Jesus, even though much of the majority of the country around and in Israel, people who were Jewish, people who were not Jewish in the land of Israel, primarily spoke Aramaic. Even in those days, the interesting thing about again, the fact that the Mishnah was written in this Hebrew of the time is kind of a nod to the fact that the rabbis who wrote it definitely found it. They thought it was holy. They thought it was special when they wrote it in the Hebrew, and when they wrote it, they were in essence also doing something that was very radical, which was writing down what is still called the oral law. Even though it's written down, we still call it the oral law. And that's a recognition that for hundreds of years, this stuff was kept orally and transmitted from teacher to teacher. The idea of writing it down was actually not was not thought of as something that we should do And the rabbis who finally did it, they felt out of necessity, which is that they were worried that as the rabbis were going to be, were fighting, were part of the groups that were fighting against the Romans, if the rabbis themselves were destroyed, all those teachings would be destroyed. And they were right to the extent that not long after the Mishnah was codified, the Jewish community in Israel really became the less powerful community as the community in Babylonia, in what is today it's really Iran and Iraq, the Persian community, Persian Jewish community. We call it the Babylonian Gemara, but much of it was written in what's today Persia or Iran and Iraq. That area became the major center of Jewish learning and Jewish life, and that will get to the Gemara, which is the next section. Mike, you were going to say something before.
Mentioning the first rabbis. Were they rabbis then, or are they still called things?
So the rabbis, when we can really start calling them rabbis, is during the Mishnaic period.
Oh, really?
Then there's no question that these Tanaim, these people we call the Tanaim, were people we would call the rabbis.
I was wondering when that.
Yep. And so when we get to the second part of the main part of what we call the crowning achievement of the rabbis, the Talmud, we have two versions of it. We have the Babylonian and we have the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem one. Sometimes people call it the Palestinian Talmud, which was actually what it was called. It was called that a lot by people until recently, which again referred to the fact that it was written in the land of Israel. But they called it, we didn't call it Israel then, right? And we didn't even call it Judea, but they called it the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. But some people said, well, it really wasn't written in Jerusalem. It was written in the northern part of Israel, the Gemara, where the Jewish community lived then. So they call it the Palestinian one because it was written in the Roman province of Palestine, what then became the Byzantine, province of Palestine. But we have two versions of the Gemara. We have the Babylonian and the Jerusalem. The Mishnah is the same on both. So if we open up the Babylonian Talmud, we look at a page. It opens up with in the Babylonian Talmud, it begins with opening up with a discussion of the Shema, of how we do the Shema. That's the first words of the Talmud, essentially, are about the opening of the Shema. If we go to the Yerushalmi, it also begins with the brachot. It's organized in a slightly different way. And it also begins with, how do we say the Shema? So there are similarities between the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud, but they're very different. And for centuries, and I mean for most of the last 1,500 years, the majority of Jews studied the Babylonian. You'd think, well, they study the one from Israel. No, because the Babylonian Talmud dealt with Jewish life outside of the land of Israel. And since most Jews for the last 2,000 years did live outside the land of Israel, the Babylonian one was more appropriate, was more relevant. It was applicable. As I mentioned last week, lately, in the last 75 years or so, 100 years, as Jews returned to the land and were dealing with agricultural issues in particular, which you can see the Yerushalmi has a whole tractate here, that's none of this is in the Babylonian. This all has to do with taking care of the agricultural laws of the land of Israel. Well, as we have farmers now, Jewish farmers in the land of Israel, trying to figure out how to do this stuff, they went back to the Jerusalem and said, what does the Yerushalmi tell us about this? So they've studied a lot more. Today, still for the most part in Israel, people will study the Babylonian. But people now study at all, the fact that they're studying it at all, and there are lots of people that study the Jerusalem, the fact that they're even studying it is a testament to the fact that now Jews live in the land of Israel and need to understand it. But
when we first started, I asked my dad about it. He said, I never touched the Jerusalem.
No.
No.
Most Jews in the diaspora never studied it. They knew it existed.
Right.
They knew that occasionally it would be quoted in in later rabbinic sources. So when we talk about the Talmud, we're talking about two sections. We're talking about the Mishnah, right? We're talking about the Mishnah, and we're talking about the Gemara. And there's two versions of the Gemara, the Babylonian and the Jerusalem. But there's only one Mishnah, right? There's only one Mishnaic section. So when we look at, and today, for example, we're going to be going back to the Mishnah. That's what we're going to study. So the Mishnah is organized by sections. It's organized by the Sidarim, the books. The Mishnah is divided into, the first section is Zeraim, which is agriculture. Then it goes into Moed, which is holidays. This is the biggest part of the Babylonian one. Really, well, not the biggest, but it's the one that we study the most because it's got all the information about our holidays, keeping Shabbat, all those tractates. As I said, I mean, here's the sections of the Mishnah. One on Shabbat, one on creating Eruvin, which are the Eruvs, right? The Eruvs we have on Shabbos. Those are both basically about Shabbos, right? Then we go into Pesach. We go into Shkalim, which is had to do with the offerings to the temple. Yoma, which is about Yom Kippur. Yoma means the day. Sukkot, right? Beit Sah, which is about food in general for some of the holidays. Rosh Hashanah, that tractate on Rosh Hashanah, the section there. Ta'anit, which deals with fasting. The Megillah, which is about Purim. Moed Katan, which is about Chol HaMoed and the days in intermediate days of Passover and Sukkot, and Chagigah, that's about holidays, but pilgrimage holidays, especially things like Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. Now, as you notice, there is no section on Hanukkah. Hanukkah does not have a section. And as I mentioned last week, it's an afterthought in the tractate on Shabbat. So as the rabbis are discussing wicks, I showed this to you. As they're discussing wicks, they ask the question, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? They actually say that. What is Hanukkah? Which only indicates to you further that they don't want to talk about it. They're not teaching about it. They're basically saying as an afterthought, what's up with Hanukkah? That shows you how little they regarded the story of Hanukkah. And as we mentioned, it's mostly because they didn't care for the Maccabees, or the Maccabees, what they eventually became, which is as bad in some ways as the Greeks, and took on very Greek ways. So the irony is that the Maccabees fought against the Greeks and ended up becoming very Hellenized themselves as they achieved power. And they actually persecuted the rabbis and the proto-rabbis, the Pharisees. They were already on their case because they didn't want Jews to be following some of the ideas that the Pharisees were laying out. And the rabbis were laying out. They didn't like the Pharisaic rabbinic Judaism, and they persecuted them. They killed them. And I say persecuted, they killed them, the Maccabees. Herod followed that tradition and killed many of the rabbis as well. I didn't like him for that reason, but they also didn't like him because, as I mentioned before, I think the bigger issue is they didn't want Jews fighting. They didn't want Jews dying, more importantly. The Jews looked at the story of Hanukkah and said, you remember how God helped us fight the Greeks? God's going to help us fight the Romans. They're just like the Greeks. As a matter of fact, most of those Romans that were running around Israel at the time, they spoke Greek. They didn't speak Latin. They actually spoke Greek. So in the Jewish mind, they're Greek. They're all Greek. They speak Greek. They're very Greek-like. They like Apollo and Zeus. They love that kind of stuff. They're all the same. And God beat them before. So God will help us beat them again. And again, as we discussed, the Romans were not the Greeks. The Romans were not in a position like the Greeks were to cave in and go, yeah, whatever, we'll let you keep your religion, which is essentially what King Antiochus did. King Antiochus didn't get defeated. He just decided, I don't need to fight a war of attrition anymore in the land of Israel. If all these people want to do is worship their God, leave them alone and let them worship their God. He pulled his troops out. And I describe it, the Maccabees were much more like, don't, take it for what it's worth, but they were much more like the Vietnamese in the sense that Vietnam didn't defeat the United States. The United States decided in 1973, who needs this? We don't need to keep losing soldiers here. Let's get out of here. If they want to be communists, let them be communists. The Greeks pretty much said, if they want to be Jewish and they want to worship in their temple, let them have their temple. We don't care. And that's what happened. The Greeks went home. but they didn't get defeated. Eventually they got defeated by the Romans because Romans beat everybody. And the Jews kind of, looks, the rabbis understood that. The rabbis said, the Greeks and the Romans are not the same. But they understood their similarities, but they were like, there's a difference here, and we can't beat them this way. And so
Well,
they really
Rabbi.
wanted Jews to stop fighting and stop dying. And so they said, you know what? We're not going to fight them anymore. And let's not speak about the Maccabees anymore, because that just gets people all riled up. Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, I studied ancient Rome. The Romans,
I know.
the Romans would have let the Jews worship their God. They didn't care about that. They let whoever they conquered worship whoever they wanted, but you could not disobey Rome. You had to abide by their taxation. They wanted money, basically. Rome was just a big corporation with an emperor who was the CEO or the chairman. And if you didn't follow the rules, you worship whoever you wanted to. But if you didn't follow the rules and you rose up, then you were crushed.
Absolutely.
That was how it worked.
Absolutely. And we actually have examples of rabbis who have relationships with Roman emperors and Roman generals. And so we have stories about rabbis who actually
Judah the Prince. and
Yeah,
Marcus
Judah,
Aurelius.
exactly. So Judah had a relationship either with Marcus Aurelius or Antoninus Pius, depending on which historian you read. But there are legends about the relationship that these rabbis had with their Roman counterpart. Again, whether or not they were 100% accurate, or maybe mythical, or maybe it was more of a Roman official, but it kind of got blown up in importance. We don't have evidence that Marcus Aurelius had philosophical discussions with, we don't have it from the Roman side, but it's a nice idea. And it's one that actually kind of gives us an understanding that we did know a little bit about the Romans. And, but the rabbis are not really that concerned with it. In all fairness, when they talk about Roman ways or Roman rituals, they're pretty dismissive of it, and they really don't care that much. Remember,
the Emperor Claudius had a close Jewish friend.
Yeah, and there were Jews that were very powerful in Rome, but and Josephus lived in Rome, but there were Roman women. What? Onkelos was a convert to Judaism who
nephew of the
emperor, according to
translated the Torah into Aramaic.
Yes. So Onkelos' translation, and again, according to tradition, there's also a Latin version of translations that Onkelos did. The interesting thing about these stories is they are based on, I mean, some of them could be true, even if they're elaborated or exaggerated. The fact is that there were relationships from them. We know that. And again, there's even possibilities that some of the Roman emperors' own family members had become Jewish. Rome was occasionally concerned with that. We know they were concerned about Christianity infiltrating the Roman society. But generally speaking, again, Jews and Romans got along pretty well outside of Israel. But within Israel, Jews would oftentimes fight for independence. And Jews, like other Roman subjects, took advantage of Roman civil wars and Roman chaos and said, hey, now's a good time for us to become independent. And they took advantage of that. I mean, that's what countries do all the time, right? They see weakness in the country that they're vassals to, and they say, hey, it's a good time for us to stop paying taxes, or good time for us to kick these guys out. And when that happened, the Jews would do that, and then the Romans would come back in and smash them. And the rabbi said, this is a bad cycle. This is not a good cycle.
Roman power wasn't absolute. There is a story, and I think it's in Robert Graves' book, I Claudius, it is written, where the Emperor Caligula demanded that his statue be placed in all the Jewish temples.
Yeah.
And his Caligula's advisors said, you can't do that. If you do that, you're going to have to slaughter every Jew in the
Ligum,
the
that-
land.
yeah.
What am I
And-
supposed to
And
say?
they basically lied to him and said, "Oh yeah, we did it," but they never did.
Yeah, and there were examples of Romans who occasionally got killed for those kind of decisions, including, you know, Roman emperors that were killed for their bad decisions. Look, what we know about Roman power in at this time was that occasionally the Romans, you know, had to put down these Jewish rebellions. Sometimes they were brutal in it, and sometimes, in the case of one of the most famous Roman governors of Judea, a guy by the name of Pontius Pilate, the guy became not he became the reputation that he had amongst the Romans was that he was going a little too far in taking and dealing with Jewish revolt and was making it worse. And so they actually pulled Pontius Pilate out of Judea, took him out because the Romans pulled him out because he was causing more problems. So the Romans would also see these things and say sometimes, hey, maybe we need to get a better administrator and there's somebody who can deal better with the local population because they generally just wanted people to pay. As Philip said, there was corporation, a business as much as anything else. And having people, having to send more soldiers was expensive. Having to deal with people not paying their taxes was expensive. And they much prefer just to have people pay their taxes, which, by the way, leads to another interesting fact that the rabbis had to deal with. Sometimes the rabbis were cooperative with the Romans when it came to the taxes, and sometimes they weren't. And sometimes it was a financial issue. And then sometimes they were, you know, sometimes the rabbis were telling people to pay their taxes and to be good Roman citizens. And then other times they were, you know, some of them were encouraging people to be defiant. Look, in the Christian Bible, the worst thing you could be is a tax collector. And we know that one of them, Matthew, was not well regarded by other Jews because he was a Roman. He was one of those guys who went around collecting taxes. And again, you know, you would pay for that honor, you'd pay for that role. You get to take your commission, you get to take your cut. And as long as you gave the Romans back their money, that's what you got to do. But it was not a job that people who wanted to have friends did. And so the fact that, you know, Matthew and other Jews who were on kind of the margins of society were drawn to Jesus. Hey, you can understand that people who are not well liked want to have hope and want to believe that, you know, they can create a community where they're also accepted, which I always find ironic that if modern day fundamentalist evangelical Christians encountered Jesus and his followers, they would kick them out of church and they would probably not want them around because they were the riffraff. They were the people that other people didn't really want to deal with. And that's pretty clear from the Christian Bible. But
You know,
anyway.
Rabbi, just want to say, when we were in Israel in February,
Mhm.
and Reverend Shaver
Mhm.
read the Sermon on the Mount from that location where
Yep.
supposedly it was read. That was the first time I had really heard it in its entirety and given, you know, in an impassioned way.
Mhm.
And I was listening to it. I was thinking to myself, do these people here, do they understand what's being said?
Yeah.
Because I don't think they're really listening to it.
Well, yes, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because, again, like I said, the irony is that most liberal Jews would be more comfortable around Jesus than evangelical Christians. So that's the irony of it.
That was my point. My point was, I, as a fairly liberal Jew, well, on social issues at least, you know, I found it very attractive. But
Yeah.
I wondered how many fundamentalists really, if they listened to it, would agree.
Yeah. And again, those ideas are obviously a lot of the ideas that Jesus puts forth are based on rabbinic teachings on Pharisaic Judaism, which is what we're going to take a look at. So of the sections that we have, of the 6 sections of the Mishnah, we're going to be looking at one that is not one that you necessarily think that Pirke Avot would come from. But again, agriculture is the first, then holidays, the Moed, the section. Then we get into Nashim, which literally means women, but it's about family law and includes things like ketubas, marriage contracts, the Levirate marriage laws. It also includes sota, adultery, gittin, doing gets, kiddushin, the marriage ceremony. And then the next section is nezikin, which is damages. It's criminal law and civil law too, but how, again, we just understand property law, land law, how to create a court, how to administer punishment. Makot literally means lashes. Avodah Zarah is in there too. This is a section that we studied a little bit as well. In addition to brachot, we studied Avodah Zarah, which is about idolatry. And again, how to enforce laws against idolatry during the Greco-Roman period, not during the time of the Canaanites, what we read about in the Bible, but how did Jews encounter idolatry during the Greco-Roman period when they're not necessarily dealing with human sacrifice really now, but we're dealing with interesting situations where offerings to gods are problematic to us and goes to things in Avodah Zarah, for example, of how to make sure we have kosher wine. Why do we have kosher wine? It's nothing, it's just grapes, right? Well, because those grapes, when they were pressed, would sometimes be offered up to Zeus or Bacchus, Dionysus, they would offer up to the gods. And a Jew didn't want to accidentally take a bottle that had already been dedicated to a god. So if Jews made the wine and made sure that none of it had ever been blessed in the name of Zeus or Bacchus, that was kosher. It had nothing to do with the ingredients. It had to do with how it was used for ritual. Same thing for oil, same thing for salt. I always wondered, what, kosher salt? It's because salt was also used for offerings. So anything that would be really used for Roman offerings, Jews said, hey, you know what? We got our stuff over here. We put a seal on it. We put a symbol on it, essentially the first hechsher, the first kosher seal. But they put a seal. They literally put a wax seal on it and say, hey, this is holy. This is not. We still need it from the standpoint of people still say we're using kosher salt. Do we need it? Do I need it? Do you need it? Kosher wine? I'm not a real stickler on kosher wine, not least of which is because it's usually not, it tastes good, but no, I'm not a wine drinker anyways. But the issue really is, do we believe that wine, if it was offered up in the name of Jesus, would it be unkosher? Is that another God? And if you believe that it's another God, then I guess you could say you shouldn't have wine it's been offered up. But it's so, where is that done? It was done 1,000 years ago when most monasteries ran a winery, right? And they made lots of alcohol, not just wine, but they made brandy, they made Benedictine, they were famous for their liqueurs and their brandies, these monks. But nowadays, how many wineries are run by a church, run by a religious organization? There are a lot run by, there's Christian Brothers, that's right. But I don't even know if that's even run by monks anymore. But we have a lot of athletes and a lot of entertainers that own wineries now. But yeah, they're not likely dedicating parts of it to the gods or to a god that's not God. And so that's why, today I don't know that kosher, that the issue is that big of a deal. But kosher salt is a style of salt now. It doesn't even have to do with you can get kosher salt. It's not even hechshered because it's a style it's coarse salt. But it was kosher in the first place only because it could be offered up to gods. And so that's an Avodah Zarah. That's an interesting tractate because it gives you kind of like an idea of what comparative religion was like during the time of the Greco-Roman period. Can you go to a bathhouse that has a statue of Venus, of Aphrodite in it? Those kind of questions. Kedoshim are about sacrifices and the temple. So this is a section where they definitely were dealing with it when it was first written and compiled, where the rabbis were saying, yeah, well, the temple exists. We need to know the laws of the temple. And that actually goes into the next section, which is the last section, Taharot, this is about offerings, and again, the Mishnah deals with sacrifices and ways of purifying the temple area, and to make sure that, you know, here's one on mikvaot, for example, on mikvahs. So these sections are very important, especially some of these sections were very important for Jews living in the land of Israel when the Mishnah was composed. And already in the time of the Mishnah, by the way, there were Jews living outside the land of Israel. There were already more Jews already living outside the land of Israel. But if you look at the Babylonian Talmud, you know, these sections here at the end, Taharot doesn't have anything in it other than Nidah, which is the laws of menstruation. Kodashim has some sections, but it's not nearly as long as the Jerusalem Talmud, or again not the Jerusalem, the Mishnah. I'm going to show you the Mishnah sections. Some of them there aren't even commentaries for it in the so all these ones here, none of these are even dealt with in the Babylonian Talmud. As I said, there's only one in all of the whole tractate of Taharot. There's Nidah. That's the only one. And again, if you look at it, it's go to the Mishnah. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 sections. And the only one that there's a section in the Gemara on for the Talmud is Nidah. It's the only one. All these other ones, there are not even commentaries on it in the Babylonian. So, and then, you know, and again, we're using the Sefaria website, which is a really great site for texts. They also have the commentaries of the later sages on them. So you have yes.
That the Mishnah was about 200 BCE to
200 in Common Era, right?
Okay. When did we as Hebrews, Jews, whatever you want to call us, stop sacrificing?
About when the temple was destroyed, so about 70. So almost halfway through that period. So about halfway through that period, there was no temple anymore. But for at least a couple hundred years later, the Jews thought that temple would come back. And so they didn't approach it like this was outdated stuff. They thought at some point we're going to come back. Now remember, between the first temple and the second temple, there were 70 years, right? There was a 70-year period. So people waiting for a generation or two, they thought that could happen. And then 80 years happen, and then 100 years happen, and 150 years. At a certain point, people start to think, when's it going to happen? But let's face it. I mean, there's still Jews today who want the temple to be restored. And I think, really, if you think about it, for our grandparents, maybe great-grandparents, the only way they could conceive of Israel being reestablished is if the Messiah came and popped it down, you know, popped the temple back down on the mount. The idea that there would be a Jewish army that would take control of the land of Israel and would reestablish a Jewish homeland for our people that anyone could come to, that would blow their mind. That there's a prime minister of the land of Israel. I mean, that would be literally as unbelievable to them as that they would greater believe that there are aliens that are coming down from other planets than that 200 years ago.
Great grandfather asked before it became a
But people wouldn't have believed it. They wouldn't have believed that it could happen. And so, not without God doing something. Because the longer that it went, it's not like we gave up on that hope. We just thought it would have to really be miraculous. That there was no piece of this that was going to happen without God intervening. And again, that's what we're left with today.
There's a group that's making the implements for the next step.
Hey, Rabbi, I have a
Maybe the
question.
implements. Yeah, John.
Sorry about the background noise. What's the time from when the end of the books were written and Pirke Avot came around? That's question number one, and then I'm going to hang up, mute.
So Pirke
And then number
Avot,
two-
so Pirke Avot, let me just finish that one. That's an easy one. Pirke Avot is finished in its current shape towards the end of when the Mishnah itself was finished. So it's part of the Mishnah, and it's one of the last parts of the Mishnah that we can see was finished. And the reason is, and you can see the Mishnah is not organized chronologically. It's organized thematically. It's a code, which means that it doesn't follow the Torah and comment on the Torah laws as they happen. It's given to, it's organized, the principle is organized around themes. So it's organized, and that's, of course, the way the Talmud follows it. It's organized around those themes. So it's like, if I want to know the laws of Shabbat, they've all been put together in one place.
So are these to a certain extent amending some of the laws?
Who? Were the rabbis
Pirke
amending?
Avot. Yes, I mean.
So Pirke Avot
some of the things have already been discussed.
Yeah, so the Mishnah was codifying those laws that the rabbis had been gathering over the centuries. And again, they didn't believe that they wrote these things. They believe that they're gathering insights that we derive from the Torah. Everything that we read about, every law that we read about, has to come back from the Torah. It has to have as its basis a law in the Torah. So the mitzvahs in the Torah then get expanded into the Mishnah, and there are thousands of them. When we get into the Gemara, it's even more. There's even more laws. And again, as we go through history, there are even more laws. So the laws, there's an accretion of laws. And to some extent, by the way, the Mishnah was also doing some work on probably chopping off some laws, right? Because if they're not in the Mishnah, if the rabbi said, we really don't like that custom, or we really don't like that tradition, it didn't make its way into the Mishnah. So there was both an emphasis on preserving these laws so that if anybody got killed, or if everybody got killed, at least we'd still have the laws. There's also this issue of, hey, let's make some decisions on what's in here and what's not in here. Because even by the Mishnaic period, things were starting to go off in very different directions. What's interesting about the Gemara is that unlike the Mishnah, which pretty much just gives us law after law after law, the Gemara actually gives us differing opinions and actually gives us different traditions. The Mishnah doesn't really do that. The Mishnah just says, this is the law, this is what you do. The Gemara then gets into these discussions and goes on some very interesting tangents. And so sometimes there'll be pages and pages of Gemara that have no law whatsoever. It goes on with legends and stories and what we would consider midrash. And it's great stuff. We love that stuff. It's actually some of the best parts of the Gemara, of the Talmud, are these commentaries. But they're very hard to follow in some cases, and they go on for pages and pages, and you forget what you were even talking about in the first place. Because 7 pages later, you're like, what was the point? Like the discussion about Hanukkah, which is, it started off with a discussion of wicks, and then before you know it, the rabbis are arguing over which direction you're supposed to light the menorah in, which is a legitimate question, because they didn't have, there wasn't like a law that said when you light a menorah, this is what you do. Because the Maccabees, quite frankly, didn't care whether you had a menorah. They didn't invent Hanukkah, and they invented it, folks. They didn't invent Hanukkah so you could light a menorah. They invented the holiday. They created the holiday so that you would celebrate their victory over the Greeks, their victory, their family's victory. Hanukkah was 100% a position that the Hasmoneans, the Maccabee family, wanted you to know. We defeated the Greeks, and we started this Sukkot holiday, this extra Sukkot holiday, in honor of our dedication of the temple. Look at what we did. We purified the temple, we kicked out the Greeks, and look at what we did. And they didn't care whether you lit a menorah. Yes, well, they didn't know that, but in their foresight, they gave us a holiday where we actually get to have that discussion. And I will tell you, it's one of the miracles, the unspoken miracles of Hanukkah, is that it's now the holiday where we deal with assimilation in our own day, which is what the Maccabees dealt with in their day, which is how do we fight against the tide of philosophy or traditions that are not our traditions. But as you know, we make concessions, because we never gave gifts on Hanukkah. No one ever gave a gift on Hanukkah, but we do. We love Hanukkah gifts, and we make them part of our holiday, but it's only because of Christmas. It's only so that our kids will go, you mean we get presents? And even better, we get 8 presents. You get 8 presents. How many presents do you have? We get 8 presents. So they get to go around going, we got 8. And then we have kids, Gentile kids going to their parents. I want to celebrate Hanukkah. Look at that guy. Max gets 8 presents. I get 1. Yeah. Yeah.
When was that?
So the Gemara, it's a good question. So Mike's saying, when is the Gemara finished? There's differences of opinion, and it goes about 100 years, but pretty much about the 500s, 500s to 600s. It's finished in Babylonia, right? Or in Persia. We say Persia and in Iraq. And yes, and we believe that it's around that period, around the 600s, for the same reason why we finished the Mishnah when we did, which is we were worried about our lives. Because what was going on in Iraq and Iran during that period was spread of Islam. Islam was conquering that part of the world. And Jews were like, well, what are we going to do now? We're going to get killed by these guys, by these Muslims. We've been living under the Persian Empire. We've been living under the Persian Empire of that period, which is different than Esther's Persians. These were the Zoroastrian Persians. These were the Sasanian Persians who were pretty powerful too. But the Muslims, the Arab armies out of Arabia and out of that area, out of Baghdad and out of North Africa, and as they were growing and growing, they just overwhelmed the Persians. They just overwhelmed them, and they crushed them. They crushed the Persians, the Muslims. They crushed them, and there's still animosity, by the way, if you really want to know, back there between Arabs and Persians. That goes back all the way to then. And even though the Persians, for the most part, became Muslim, there is resentments that is still there. And I know it because I got Persian friends who cannot stand Arabs, especially Saudis and especially Arabs, because they still feel that their country was overrun by Iran. Well, a different form of Islam, you're absolutely right on, is the Shia and Sunni forms. But some of that also goes to the ethnic identities. And I don't want to diminish the fact that there's philosophical differences and other things. A lot of it comes down to ethnicity. A lot of it comes down to the fact that Persians have a very proud culture. And even though, again, they became Muslim, there's a piece of them that's not quite very comfortable with Arab domination, which is why the Persians can't stand the Saudis, why they have been fighting with proxies in Yemen, as we talked about, in other places. There's a lot of animosity there. And Persia, the modern day Iranians would definitely like to be the leaders of the Islamic world. They don't want the Arabs to be the leaders of the Islamic world.
They have a lot of Christians, like Lebanon, you have a lot of
Yeah.
Christian areas and Muslim areas.
Yeah.
They get along?
The Christians who lived in Muslim countries, and primarily Arab countries,
Right.
but also in Iran, they are getting out of those countries as much as they can. So there's hardly,
Lebanese
yeah,
and his whole family.
yes, pretty much every Christian who could got out of those countries. And they're getting out of Iran, and they're getting out of Lebanon, and they're getting out of countries that are both Shia and Sunni. They're getting out of Israel, right? Christians have left Bethlehem. When we were in Bethlehem in June on our trip, no, we were there in February, when John and Philip were there. I talked to our tour guide in February, and I said to him, I hear the Christian community is down to about 15-20%. He goes, I wish. I said, we're probably less than 5%. He was a Christian. He's a Christian. He said, maybe 5%, maybe 5% on a good day.
Islam so attractive.
It's not that it's attractive. They've left. They fled. They do not want to be there when it becomes only Muslim country.
You make sure you tell them.
So Bethlehem was a predominantly Christian city. It's not anymore. The only Christians who are staying there are the people who run the tourism business there, and they are worried for their lives. Look, Phyllis, what happened on October 7th? They know that if Israel wasn't there, it would happen to them. The only people who are preserving Christians in the land of Israel right now is Israel. That's the only thing that saves them. And they know that. They can't say it, but they know it. So
Bethlehem.
I'm just left. It's easier to leave.
I'm just questioning why a woman
Phyllis,
wanna be a Muslim.
I'm
Look what they said to them.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Bethlehem was real dumb.
Bethlehem was a dump. Well, guess what? That's the best part of the best part of the West Bank you can see is Bethlehem, honestly. Well,
I
Ramallah,
mean,
Ramallah is,
what are they doing with all the money?
I don't know, Philip. I don't know, Philip. It's a good question. So now, this is what we're gonna, oh, John, yeah, John, what are you gonna say? John, come on.
Nothing. No, the second question was, is this nothing? I thought Pirke Avot was the ethical discussions of the fathers, but
Well, we're
now
gonna,
it's really more laws, and I thought Deuteronomy was the laws.
Pirke Avot is only that section. The section we're going to start studying today, the six chapters of this small tractate. It's a very small tractate of the Talmud. But yes, this is aneclectic. This is what we call sayings or teachings, like the sayings of Confucius, which we also aren't sure were written by one person, by the way, just so you know. That these sayings are written by different rabbis. They're attributed to different rabbis, so we know that they weren't written by one person. They were collected. And the purpose of this is to actually kind of why we're starting with this, and again, why we're introducing this as we talk about Rabbinic Judaism, is that this really lays out what Rabbinic Judaism is, which is a tradition that, again, I'm going to start right now with the first paragraph. Moshe kibel Torah mesinai. That's one of the most famous lines in the whole Talmud, of all rabbinic literature. Moses received the Torah at Sinai. Now that's really important because that doesn't say he got the 10 Commandments. That doesn't say even necessarily he only got the Torah scroll. Moses got the law at Mount Sinai. And I'm going to show you why it's not even necessarily the Torah scroll. Because this idea that Moses got the Torah directly from God means that the laws as it was passed down, as it was transmitted, means that it's a chain of tradition that goes back to God. It goes back to Sinai, right? It goes back to the moment of revelation. And so for us, revelation is then transmitted through Moses. And then it says he transmitted it to Joshua, to his student, his pupil. Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. They said three things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah. Now, they're the first people quoted, right? The men of the great assembly. And what's interesting about this is that we don't know much about the men of the great assembly. They didn't know much about the men of the great assembly. How do we know? Because they don't talk about it a lot. And we really don't know much about it. This was called, in Hebrew, it's Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the men of the big assembly. So Ronnie just says, is it different than the Sanhedrin? No. Well, we don't know. But the rabbis felt that this was the great Sanhedrin. This was the administrative body that helped run Jewish life in the land of Israel during the Persian period. From the time they returned back from the land of Iran, the lands of Babylonia and Persia. During that time, we don't know much about Jewish life in the land of Israel. So we're talking about from about 450 BCE to about the time of 200, about the time of the Maccabees. So over that 200-year period, we know almost nothing about the land of Israel. It's not because things were bad, because people were fighting a lot of wars. It's because it was actually kind of peaceful. There was not a lot of chaos. There was not a lot of fighting. There was not civil war. There was not external threats. We don't know about it because nobody wrote about it. There was nothing to write about. And Jews didn't write history. They wrote texts and occasionally give us snippets of history in those texts, but they're never for the sake of history. I shouldn't say never. I mean, the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles are to some extent to record events. But that's rare. I mean, that's a small part of the Bible as a whole. It's definitely not the intention of the Bible, and it's not the intention ever of the Talmud. So the Talmud has historical snippets, but it's definitely not a history book. It's definitely tough to piece it together. The only historian we really have of this period is Josephus. He's the only person we have. And he does give us some information about what this time was like. The books of the Maccabees also have a little bit about what happened before them. In the books of the Maccabees, which again were not kept by Jews, it was kept by the church. So there is some information in those texts. And we have a little bit of information we have from the Persians, and we found some Persian documents about the Jewish community in the land in Persia, but we don't have much archaeological evidence or information from people in the land of Israel during this period. And what we know about who is in charge and who's making decisions is that Jews were not politically in charge of the land of Israel. They really don't have much authority. The Persians administer the country as a province. And the Persians seem to be pretty calm about it. And for the most part, for about the next 150 years, from about 450 to about 300, everything's pretty calm. Jews pay taxes. They part of the Persian Empire. They have their temple. It's a small temple. It's not a very big temple. It's in Jerusalem. Everything's running pretty smooth. Jews are fighting in the Persian army. They're paying their taxes. Everything's pretty cool. And we really don't know much about it. Well, that all changed when Alexander the Great came and conquered the Persians and essentially started a new administration of Greeks. Now, things got a little difficult there, and that's when we start to get some information. But it's more about who's in charge, whether it's the Greeks in Egypt, what we call the Ptolemaic dynasty, or whether it's the Seleucid dynasty in Syria, Antiochus and his family. So we don't really know much about the land of Israel, but we do hear in the books of the Maccabees, and we do hear about it in Josephus, Jews caught in the middle between these fights. But we really don't know much about what the Jews did. We just know that some people took this side, some people took that side. And overall, though, Jewish life was still pretty calm during that Greek period. Things really hit the head during this time of year, 150 BC, so almost 300 years after the Jews came back. That's when we have the story of Hanukkah. And that's where we had this critical fight against the Greeks, which the Greeks of Syria, the Syrian Greeks, Antiochus and his family, where we have a fight. And it became such a big deal that we actually get some history. We get some real information. And Josephus is fascinated with this because these Jewish leaders, these priests, end up becoming king, which is crazy because they're priests. They're not supposed to be kings. But this is what's happening during this period of time, during the men of the Great Assembly. But we just really don't know it doesn't seem like life was that difficult. It doesn't seem like there was a whole lot of tension for people in the land of Israel. The biggest tension was probably dealing with Greco and then soon to be Roman influence on them. How do they deal with these new philosophies? How do they deal with these new traditions? How do they deal with people who have a totally different outlook on the world? And they really did. So we have a little bit of that, but again, we don't have a lot, and we don't have a lot of discussion because it's overall pretty calm. So still, at this point, all we've been given is that the Torah has been transmitted down to the men of the Great Assembly. And we don't even get any individuals here. That's one of the kind of the giveaways that we really don't know much about it. Now, we are going to get one coming up, so it's not like we're not going to get any, but it's so small. The information is so small. It's like, well, that just kind of gives it away, that they really don't know much about the men of the Great Assembly. And it's not like, I'm not saying anything that an Orthodox Jew wouldn't say, which is, we know all of this. They don't. The information is just not there. But, the idea of this being a continuous chain is very important for the rabbis. That everything that they're teaching goes all the way back to God, through Moses, through Joshua, through everybody else. And
there's also a political conflict involved because the Pharisees, this is the Pharisees, the chain of oral Torah, et cetera. But the priestly class, the Sadducees, said we have the Torah and that's it. We take it literally. And they rejected this oral stuff. So you have this political conflict with rabbis and the priestly class.
So everybody heard Ronnie's comment. This is a problem. Because Ronnie, look who just told us that the law just passed through. The elders, the Zikanim, all right, the leaders, to the prophets, to the men of the grace. No priests?
Right.
Priests didn't, of course the priests did. We actually read this. That the priests were the ones who kept the Torah. They were teachers. We read that. We read that they're teaching the Torah. It's in the Bible. Rabbis just cut them out. Now, some of the rabbis were priests. It's not like they hated the priests. It's not like some of them were priests, but they just cut them out of the chain of tradition. They're nowhere in the chain of tradition. So yes, Ronnie's point is their absence in this chain is very noticeable. Yeah. So again, we'll get to there are priests there. Don't worry, they're rabbis, but they're not listed as the chain in this chain of tradition because again, as far as the rabbis felt, they took themselves out of that chain because they were not they did not adhere to or at least promulgate this idea of oral Torah, oral tradition. The Sadducees did not believe in it. They believed in a more literal version of the Torah, which is it's got to be there. You got to show me where it is. The rabbis don't disagree with that. They need to show it too, but they're interpreters. They're people who we would use today. They would be looser interpreters of the Constitution, right? They'd be more liberal in their interpretation, saying, well, it could be there. If you look at it, it might be there. And then there's strict interpreters of the Constitution that says, if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, we don't agree with it. Now, I will tell you that as I went to a liberal Jewish school, private school, we were pretty much kind of like a little bit led to believe that, again, the Reform Jews were more like the rabbis and the Orthodox Jews were more like the Sadducees. But also, again, it probably was somewhere in there too that strict constitutionalists were also like the Sadducees, and liberal politicians, New Deal politicians were more like the rabbis.
Fundamentalist Christians be more like the Sadducees?
Well, that's an interesting fact, right? We would kind of maybe say that, right? That the church, the more fundamentalist Christians would be more like Sadducees. If they're saying that we only believe in the literal word of God, that kind of is a modern version of that. I would agree. So yeah, but there's not many Karaites, right? So as Mike said, there are Karaites, right? There are people who are strict readers of this, but even the Karaites, and even the Sadducees made interpretations. They had to make interpretations, but they didn't call them that. And they weren't obsessed with it. The rabbis were obsessed with creating these because of this rule right here. Make a fence around the Torah. This is their justification for doing this. Their justification is essentially doing what they're doing right here, which is they're trying to do it in a nice way, which is, hey, let's be very, well, here it's translated as patient, but again, let's be conscious of the law. Let's raise up lots of students, which is, by the way, what you got to have if you're a rabbi, right? You have to have students. And then, of course, making the fence around the Torah. All of this is a siyag. It's a fence. It's a gate. It's a protection around the Torah. So we don't want to violate the Torah, which is what we'd say to the Sadducees. Sadducees, we're priests. We're only trying to make sure that we don't violate these rules. And the way we do that is by creating protections for the Torah. Joanne.
What's the difference between rabbis and priests?
In this period of time, it was substantial because while I said some priests did become rabbis, this idea that there was a way to essentially approach Judaism in a way that didn't just require priestly ritual is pretty important. Because if Jews were already creating these traditions and these holidays that had nothing to do with the temple, that means that the rabbis were already collecting these traditions and teaching these traditions and telling people, oh, here's how you celebrate Rosh Hashanah. You don't just offer a sacrifice. This is how you these are the rules of Teshuvah. When they're telling people this is the way we celebrate Passover, if we didn't have the Mishnah, we'd have no idea that we have a Passover. If you read the Torah, you're like, oh, I eat a goat, I have matzah, I have a goat, I have matzah, and I have bitter herb, and that's it. But guess what's in the Mishnah? Yeah, but you wouldn't know that from the Torah, From the Talmud, you would. The Mishnah would tell you, you got to drink 4 cups. The Mishnah says you got to drink 4 cups. You know what's in the Mishnah? The 4 questions. Which really aren't 4 questions, there's 4 answers. But those 4 answers, dipping your foods and doing these, that's in the Mishnah. But it's not in the Torah. So the rabbis were already putting these rules together so that people could follow them and knew them. And guess what? None of that stuff for Passover requires you to be in the temple to do it. You're doing this at home. You're not doing it in Jerusalem. It's clear from what the Mishnah is saying. This has nothing to do with the sacrifice that you're eating in one night. No. So the rabbis knew what they were doing. They knew that they were doing something different than the priests. They didn't have an issue with it. But as long as it was connected to the Torah, it didn't matter. But yeah, they're not showing the deference to the priests that you'd think they would. Correct. And some of them did. But to some extent, they're breaking away from their own traditions, their own ways. They probably, some of them realized our way, that way of the priest, is not going to make it. And of course, it didn't make it. Once the temple was destroyed, it was done.
Fairness, once the temple is gone, there's no role for the priest.
Correct. But 50 years before or 100 years before, when the priests are still trying to figure out, and the rabbis are running around teaching these kind of things, and the priests are like, stop it with this stuff. This is not Judaism. And they really did. They were like, why are you teaching this? This isn't in the Torah. Show me in the Torah. You could imagine a priest and a rabbi arguing. Where in the Torah does it say we're supposed to drink 4 cups of wine? Where in the Torah does it say? And the rabbi would say, well, it says in the Torah that God redeemed us and that God took us out. And it says 4 times that God did stuff. Well, that's why we drink 4 cups. Oh, wonderful. Where does it say 4 cups of wine? So they said, this is the way we celebrate it. Well, they knew it. They knew it. Yeah, and they knew it. They knew that but the priest said, it's not here. So you can imagine they had this discussion. So here's the next line, right? The second verse says, Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, was one of the last of the men of the great assembly. So we don't know any of them by name except for this guy. So we don't know anything about it other than Shimon was the last. Now, by the way, there might also be a little secret here, which is we don't know that Shimon was part of the men of the great assembly. But if he was a part of this assembly, whether it's the Sanhedrin or it's this Jewish body, look, I've had rabbis and teachers who tell me there was no such thing as the men of the great assembly. We've never found it. There's no evidence for it. It's a fabrication. It's not real. I don't believe that it's not real. I believe that maybe the rabbis imagined that they did more than than maybe they did in reality. But I believe that there was a body of Jewish connections that people had during that period of time to kind of rule on behalf of Jewish tradition. Did they do a lot? I don't know. Do we have proof of it? No. But the idea that there was some collective of Jewish leadership at the time, I think is fair. Do they work outside of the priesthood? I guess. I mean, the only alternative is that the priest made all these decisions, in which case the rabbis did what they could have done, which is just not give the priest credit for it right here, which is that Shimon HaTzadik was a priest. Shimon was a priest, and we'll say he was in the Great Assembly. Now we know that he might have been a priest, he might have been a high priest, but let's just say he's a part of the Great Assembly. One of the things we know about Shimon is that whatever he was, he said 3 things. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omeid. Al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Why am I saying that? Because we sing it, right? Al shlosha devarim, right? Al shlosha, al ha'torah, al ha'avodah. Now, one of those 3 things is the temple service, right? Is the avodah, is the sacrifice. So it doesn't seem like Shimon seems very connected to the temple, right? To the sacrifices. You got to have that. But what else does he say? He says you have to have Torah, right? The Torah, the sacrifices, and then gemilut chasadim. Now, we as Jews of the last 2,000 years with no temple do not understand avodah meaning sacrifice. Avodah literally means service, right? But rather than it being service to other people or service in a general sense, it's the service that we have in our synagogue. It's prayer. And so we would say that avodah is prayer. And so a lot of the translations of this text are the world stands on three things, right? Torah, right? It's the Bible or Jewish law, prayer, and then acts of loving kindness. Gemilut chasadim, good, acts of love, mercy. So of chesed. So that's a tough word to translate, gemilut chasadim. They translate it as acts of piety. I'm not loving that. Unfortunately, we don't have Mary's King James, but we do have, there's no King James, unfortunately, did not translate it. But the great thing about this is there are actually other translations. And so there's this translation, which we're going to be using a lot. This is kind of a more modern translation, but there's also other translations. There's, well, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Like if we go back to 1897 translation, it says,
Oh, Brian was there.
I was in Talmud Torah. I didn't get up in that. I was still,
so the 1897 translation says Thora, right? Thora, that's a weird. Does that have to do with Thor? No, it's Torah. It's the Tet. Torah, worship, and bestowal of kindness. That's a weird translation. I don't know that I'm really loving. I'm loving that. Here you can see it in translation to Spanish, right? El culto y la practiza, right? And again, no, not at all, not at all. Now, if you look at these translations, different translations are giving this one. It definitely has to do with doing good things to your fellow man. But yeah, I think the important translation for Gemilut Chasadim, whether you understand it as acts of loving kindness or acts of love or mercy, that I don't like piety so much, because piety is a translation of the word chesed as being pious. That's where we get the word chassid from. But we really don't get the word chassid from necessarily just pious. Hasidism is also supposed to be about love and mercy, and chesed, the quality of chesed, which is oftentimes translated as mercy or compassion. So obviously acts of piety seems to be more religious acts rather than acts of goodness. I think I think the idea is the way we treat other people. But this is such a famous phrase because to some extent, it's where we start thinking about what are our principles. And this is why Pirke Avot, and this is what we're going to have through the rest of Pirke Avot, is a saying from a person, because again, this one was the men of the great assembly. It's like a bunch of people. Like, who said that? Men of the great assembly. Did they all say that? But this one is attributed to a person. Well, the only one that we know of from that, yes. But he said something that's pretty powerful, which again is, it's a kind of a phrase like, if somebody's going to say, what's the three things that are the most important? You know what I love? I just heard it again recently. I wanted to stop it, like just stop that clip. Is somebody, they'll do, like a coach or somebody will say, it all comes down to one thing. And then they'll go, playing hard, being with your teammates, good sportsmanship. Wait, but you said it was one thing, right? And they give you a list of like 5 things. I'm like, wait, you just said it was one thing. It's your one thing, which is 5 things. But I think coming down to something that you could distill your message down to. We'll get to that in a second. But Shimon the Righteous gives us these 3 things, and it really does go back to some of the things that we even have in the Bible, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we're going to get to soon when we get to some of the prophets.
To this Shimon.
Yeah, well, there's other references to him, not many, but I'll show you one thing. But we do have, what I was gonna say is, we do have sayings in the Torah, which are essentially, what does God want of us, right? Right? The most famous one, anybody? What's the most famous one of those? Anybody?
Come on, Ronnie.
Somebody's,
Charity.
no.
Just walk humbly, that's the help.
Well, yeah, but what's the full thing? I knew somebody would get it.
Yeah.
Somebody give it to
What's
me.
the rest of it?
Well, here's the different translations. I'll give you one of the translations. There's a lot of translations here. This is from the prophet Micah. This is all got stuff on it. You know this phrase, you know this line, because it sounds familiar to us when we, of course, get to these Pirke Avot, right? What does God want of you? What has the Lord told you? Right? He has told you what to do. And that is, these translations are horrible. What does God require of you? Carry out justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. So Micah gives us this famous phrase. Churches use this phrase all the time, right? What does God want of us to do these things, right? Right? So there's different translations of it. You can see very different translations of it. But to do mishpat, to do justice, to love mercy, to be a person of chesed, right? Same words that we were talking about before, and to walk humbly. So we get this in the Bible itself. So we start to get these sayings, even in the prophets, that are great sayings that people can say, oh, let me just show. Let me just show you one other thing while we're doing this stuff. Let me just give you this one. Where is this? No. Hold on one second. Let me just find this one. So let me just show you this one. Shimon HaTzadik. This is the tomb. This is the tomb of Simon the Righteous. Here's the article. Yeah, well, it's pretty much, this is all we know about him. The tomb of Simon the Just. This is the only thing we really know about this guy, is that according to tradition, let's see if it says a little bit here. Here it is. The Talmud, Josephus, and Sirach, which is one of the extra biblical sources, a pseudepigrapha source, all contain accounts of him. He was termed the righteous because of his piety. He was deeply interested in the spiritual. This is what you were asking about, Phyllis. According to the Talmud, Alexander the Great marched through the land of Israel, and Simon the Just, dressed in his priestly garments, went to meet him. That's a story that we have no basis for, other than the Talmud tells us the story that that's when he lived. And again, you can see.
Josephus was writing this 400 years later.
Correct. And this story isn't even in Josephus. This is in the story of, in the Talmud, which wants us to, which has no real concern with it. So again, Jewish high priest during the Second Temple period. We don't know much about him. And then again, we have a, yep. So we don't know much about him. He is quoted. These are teachings that were quoted about him. And that's what we have. So that's all I can tell you. So here's this famous teaching that we just read, and that's all we really know about him in this area that we believe he was buried in. So that's what we got. That's what we got on Shimon. Not a lot. He's a more mythical character in Jerusalem. So we don't know much about who he is. To his grave? Okay.
I'll drive.
Okay. So according to tradition, though, Antigonus of Soho, East Soho, that's all he's called, not Soho, right? He wasn't from Soho, south of Houston, received the oral tradition from Shimon HaTzadik. He used to say, do not be like servants who serve the master in the expectation of receiving a reward. Be like servants who serve the master without the expectation of receiving a reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. So he said a couple things, right? He didn't just say one thing. He said a couple things. These are two very interesting ideas, which we'll take a look at. But he was a student of Shimon, according to tradition. So that, I guess that's another thing that we know, at least from the Talmud. Yes, exactly, Ronnie. I was just about to say, that is about as Greek of a name as you can get. Antigonos. That's a very Greek name, which tells us, first of all, that Jewish people during this period of time, which is not long after Alexander the Great, if Shimon HaTzadik lives around 300 or 280 or whatever, and this guy lives around 250, not long after Alexander the Great, the Jews have taken some very Greek styles and modes, including their names, right? And so he has a Greek name, even though his teacher, Shimon, has a very biblical name, right? One of Jacob's sons, one of the tribes is Shimon. Antigonus, on the other hand, is not. What we know about Antigonus, in addition, is only where we know that he's from Soho, which is a city, it's a village in Israel. And so we only know about him that he came from there. So sometimes, as we're about to see, we learn a little bit about the person. Shimon HaTzadik, we knew very little other than the fact that the rabbis really don't tell us it's because we were supposed to know who he was. And we know he's a priest, a high priest. We know that he's the head, or was one of the heads of the assembly or of Jewish leadership during this time, or just before Antigonus. Antigonus does not seem to have been, nowhere near as prominent as his teacher Shimon, but he's part of the chain because he learned from him. And all we really know about Antigonus is where he came from. And he had a very Greek name. And so we're going to see some people in the Mishnah and in the later parts of the Gemara that have very not Hebrew names. They have very, very Greek names. A lot of them. Not all, but it goes back and forth. And sometimes the person has a Hebrew name, but their father had a Greek name. So it's not like just because they had a Greek name that they didn't have a Hebrew name the next generation, kind of like us today. Got a lot of Jacobs and Michaels walking around, but their parents maybe were named not very Jewish names. I'm not saying Mark is pretty not Jewish name, but there's other names, yes, that are really, really not Jewish. So it tells us that we've been doing that for a long time. Look, people had very Gentile names for a long time in this country. And we've gone back to some of those things, right? My wife and I have very not Hebrew names. All three of our daughters have Hebrew names.
My name Dorothea comes from the Greek.
Yes,
But
it's Greek.
Jay and Sean and Caleb have Jewish names.
Well, I understand, but when we think about, yes, it was very, very common for Jews not only not to have a biblical name, but to have a very Gentile name.
But his father had
Yes. So A lot of people didn't. We're all looking around, well, why is that? Because Jewish people used to have a Jewish name and a Gentile name, and there was no issue with it. People were fine with it.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yeah.
my dad's name was Samuel,
Yeah.
and he changed it to Stanley.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
And when we were about to travel, I needed my birth certificate for something, and I found my birth certificate and my Jewish birth certificate.
Yeah. And was your Hebrew name Yochanan?
No, Yaakov.
Yaakov. See, so Yochanan, John is a Hebrew name, right? Yonatan is Jonathan, but Yochanan is John. And a lot of Johns are not Yochanans. That was not a common name, but Jacob was definitely a common name. So a lot of J names, Yaakov is the Hebrew version of it. It's not the other name. I think Jonathan now is has been a pretty common Jewish name.
Three brothers in Copeland who were in the rag trade, and they were coming to America, and they were I'll remember the joke after.
All right. But I will tell you, it was not uncommon. I mean, my dad's name, Philip, was a very Greek name, and his whole family were Greek.
Beryl, Cheryl, and Cheryl.
Beryl?
Schmerl. So Beryl says, listen, boys, if we go to America, we have to have American names. I'm changing my name to Buck. Cheryl says, I'm changing my name to Chuck. Schmerl says, I'm staying in Poland.
Oh, very good. Very good. And that's how it happened. That's good. Okay. All right. So Ronald, you came up with it. But yeah, we would oftentimes have but again, people, like everybody knew these names. So there's, think about how many Jews were walking around with the names like Irving and Harold, and these were very non-Jewish names. Yeah, but they were not, but everybody knew that every Harold, was Hirsch. Everyone knew they were Hirsch. Everybody. If anyone introduced themselves as Harold, you go, oh, Hirsch. Yeah, what's up, Hirsch? Everyone knew. Every Irving was Yitz. It was Yitzhak. Sometimes, they go, oh, his name's Irving. Hey, what's up, Yitz? You're like, how did he, because everyone knew that Irving was Yitz. So we had these names, but everyone knew that they were covers for other names. I mean, I think, John, your story of your dad is a little bit unusual in the sense that, his birth certificate actually carried the Hebrew name, but it was very common for Jews to have a Gentile cover name, if you will, which was, one of the ways. And it's so weird is that Christians obviously had Hebrew names, and nobody ever, accused them of being, too Jewish. But for us, it was too Jewish. It's not the case anymore. But again, in the Talmud, we see these generational things. One of the great rabbis, his name is Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Well, Eliezer is a very Hebrew name, but Hyrcanus, the very Greek name, which means his dad had a fully Greek name and he had a Hebrew name. So this idea of generationally, going back and forth with Hebrew names was definitely something that we saw happen during this period. So one of the great things about this guy saying, about Antigonus is saying, is that he reminds us that, again, you could say that this is a time when people were servants, right? Avadim, we normally think of it as being like in our day that it's just the guy who works for somebody, but he could literally mean a slave, which means that slaves did get paid. There was compensation for them, but serving a master, if you're going to use the term slave or servant, you got to use the term master. But it really does have this understanding that God is the master, God is the one in charge, and we're serving God without the expectation of getting a reward, which is a really interesting idea. Because if you think about it, if we literally walk around our days thinking that we're doing what God wants to do because we want to get something out of it, it means we're not really motivated by anything other than our own material or greedy desires. And that's not a way we're supposed to live, right? We don't do it with the expectation of a reward. The problem, of course, again, is that when we get that reward, right? If we get it in heaven, that's going to be, well, I guess you could say, it's not happening in this world. But most importantly, it sets us up for constant feelings of disappointment, which is, why is God not giving me what I'm due? I'm doing everything God wants. Why am I not getting anything back? Somebody's going to say something. It's a pretty powerful line. It's a good reminder. And again, the fear of heaven, moreh shamayim, yirat, fear of God, trembling or being fearful of God is one translation. It could also be let reverence of heaven, let your humility, let your understanding that you're below. So the idea of it being necessarily just fear,
What?
awe is a good word, reverence, understanding the majesty. Moreh shamayim, definitely by more religious people, would be a sense of fear, but I wouldn't say religious, but using fearful imagery. But the idea of reverence and having, having that. But again, it goes with this other section. It goes with this section of serving your master, serving that. Again, I don't know that it has to be a servant-master relationship.
It's a metaphor for God and man, right?
Well, it is. It's for sure a metaphor between God and man, but is it encouraging people to go about life with that kind of feelings of people who are expecting a reward for the things that they do in general? Again, the word there for master is not the normal one. It's a rav, which is master. This is where the word rabbi comes from. It's not a slave master necessarily. It's a master. It's definitely putting God in that situation of being the master. But it could also be a student, teacher relationship too. It's not necessarily, again, the word that we would use for a owner or a master of slave, which would be a Baal or a Doni, Lord. Doesn't use that word. It uses Rav. So that's Antigonus. Any comments or questions or points on that? Let's take a look at the next one then, which now is going to give us two teachings, two different people. It says Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Treda, which is again where he comes from, the place of the city of the village of Treda. And Yossi ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem. That's the first person we've read of so far that's been from Jerusalem, which tells us that during this period, even earlier on, because this is going chronologically, that people were not necessarily living in Jerusalem itself. And this is during the time of the temple. Temple's already, is here. It's already like, you don't have to think about it. This is not like later on times when people were fleeing Jerusalem. Not all these people are living there. So it gives us both of these two guys. And it says that both of these guys received the oral tradition from Shimon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, and Antigonus. Now, it doesn't say that there. That's why it's in parentheses or in brackets, because it actually doesn't say that. It says from them. Now, because it's a plural, it can't be just Antigonus. So that's why they put both of them. Now, it also could be understood that they inherited it from everybody who came before him. But this is what they say. Okay. We're going to read both of them. They're separate paragraphs. The first one that's mentioned is Yossi ben Yoezer. He used to say, let thy house be a house of meeting for the sages. Okay, chachamim, that's the word that's used there. Not rabbis, not priests, not Sadducees or Pharisees. The word is chachamim, which means the wise people, which they translate as sages. Fine, that's fine. And sit in the very dust of their feet and drink in their words with thirst, which tells you that, again, what they're encouraging people to do is have their places, their homes or their communities be places where sages will meet. And there are people who say this is kind of disgusting. You have to literally sit at the dust of their feet. You have to sit at their feet. Seems kind of strange. But this idea that people, are sitting there at the feet of these people, we still say that phrase, right? He learned at the feet of the master, literally under, sitting at the feet of this person. Again, it's also seen as kind of a sense of humility that, people would wash the feet of people. But of course, again, part of it is a flip, which is that, whether the Pope washes the feet of somebody or, Jesus would wash the feet of somebody or somebody would wash the feet of somebody as a sense of honoring them and taking care of them. It's a flip on the fact that people would probably have been sitting at Jesus's feet, which is kind of what you get in the Christian Bible, at least when it's given in the sense of his disciples, that they were at his feet. It's probably somewhat true, but also kind of an idiom. It's something that people say, sitting at the feet of those people.
Little children sit at the feet of the teacher.
Parents, they're teachers, they're people that they.
Yes.
But I think people really do, people do that at school with little kids, but this is clearly not addressed to kids. This is clearly addressed to adults and telling them that if your homes are places where these sages can be, then you'll learn from them, right? That's the first teaching. That's Yossi's teaching, and then Yossi ben Yoezer. And the next Yossi is Yossi ben Yochanan from Jerusalem, used to say, let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of your household. Engage not in too much conversation with women. They said this with regard to one's own wife. How much more so does the rule apply with regard to another man's wife? From here, the sages said, as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself, he neglects the study of Torah, and in the end, he will inherit Gehenna. He kind of deserves to go to hell. That's the phrase, right? He's going there. Now, he starts off with a very similar idea to what Yossi ben Yoezer said, which is, let your house be wide open. Well, okay, it's kind of maybe wide open to teachers, wide open to other people, wide open to anybody who's poor, anybody who needs it. But then he gets into this thing about the women. Now, people have been commenting on this section for a long time. Nowadays, even more so as we study and as we read with men and women together. But there's definitely a sense that in these conversations that a man is having with a woman they're not holy discussions. They're not discussions. Correct. And there were no other women that they were studying with. If they were studying with other women, this line wouldn't make any sense. The whole, principle in Yentl, right? And Isaac Basheva's Zinger story and Barbara Streisand's movie, she wasn't supposed to be there. So it wasn't like this was something that, they're not allowed to talk to women when they're studying. No, because they're not studying with them. The issue here is that a person is going to be led to temptation because he's going to commit problems. It's going to be problems. Now it says, look, first you might say, well, it's just taking him away from study. No. He is going to eventually go to hell because he's going to commit adultery. That's what it's saying. Well, yes.
If they can be led astray that easily.
Sure. But the way to prevent yourself from doing that is not being in conversations with. So this is why, in the Orthodox Jews today, in some cases, will not be left alone with a woman.
When you put this down, we ran into the Chabad rabbi at pet mart or something. And I started talking to him and Mary, and I thanked him, you know, so he was
Yeah.
good. Mary put his hand at her.
Uh-oh,
No,
uh-oh.
Yeah.
That's a no-no.
So-
Yeah.
So,
he was really nice about it. but still.
yes, but it's also, again, it's just, it's when our ways, you know, we're confronted with it. But again, the idea is not to be led to temptation. Look, I remember, and it's been this way as well. I mean, like, I'm friends with our Chabad Rabbi Tony, but I'm not gonna, I know that if he's not home, his wife isn't gonna answer the door. I used to see a guy, this was when I lived in England and lived near the Chabad house at Oxford, and the rabbi was there, and when he wasn't there, I mean, he had students that would wait for him, and if his wife was home alone, the guy would sit on the front porch. I would drive by and see some guy sitting on his porch. I knew the wife was home, but the guy couldn't go in.
Yeah, no, I was tempted to hug my Chabad rabbi at
Yeah.
one point.
Nope.
He was so sweet.
Yep.
And so he told me about the thing that they have with being led astray. I said, I'm too old to lead anybody,
Don't say that. Your husband doesn't feel that way.
Something like that too, with a very Orthodox rabbi or about, and the normal thing for you and I to do is you meet somebody, you go to shake their hand, I went, and he went like this, and I went, oh, I'm not touching you. He goes, oh, I remember. You know?
In Crown Heights, this led to a lot of problems between the blacks and the Jewish business people who were Orthodox because the blacks thought that they wouldn't touch them because
They were
they were
black.
black. But they wouldn't touch them because they were women.
Yeah.
Right. See, Rabbi Shimon, may he rest in peace. He was, in his mind, he was an Orthodox person.
Uh-huh.
He had no problem hugging women.
Yeah, but people,
He was not
But-
Hasidic, I bet.
but
you.
people
No, he was
people
not.
would have said, hey, he went too far. That's what Shlomo Karlebach got in trouble for. I told you, hugging people he ended up being thrown out because he was hugging people.
But
Well,
his
His problem ended up becoming he did more than hug them, but the problem. No, I mean, I'm not speaking out. I loved Shlomo, but that was one of the things that happened especially after he died, was that a lot of women came forward and say there was other stuff. No, Shlomo Karlebach.
I knew whose son was in Jerusalem at the wall and not eating. She went to rescue him. The Orthodox rabbi went to help her. Separate planes. They took separate planes to Jerusalem.
Mhm. Listen, we have this a lot on flights to Israel where people will say, I don't want to sit next to a woman. A Hasidic guy will say, I don't want to sit next to the woman.
God forbid she has her period.
No, but I mean, they'll literally tell the guy, so husband and wife are sitting next to each other, or I'm sitting next to my daughter or whatever, and he's on the other side, he'll say to me, hey, can you switch seats with your daughter? Now, look, I mean, I would do it, but I don't like I want to sit on the aisle. I don't want to
Rabbi.
sit. Well, I paid money to sit in there. And look, I feel bad about it, but dude, get on your own plane. I'm not kidding. I'm
Rabbi,
not
that's why-
going to give up my seat.
Rabbi,
Well-
that's why I flew business class, so Kelly would have her own berth,
Right.
and I would have mine and have to sit next to her.
I don't, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I normally would help somebody, but I'm not gonna deal with that. If like, if I can, if I want to, I mean, like, it's not motivated. I mean, if I'm paying for an aisle, I'm sitting in the aisle. So, but I understand. I mean, I understand but he knew that when he bought the ticket. If he doesn't want it, let him sit up in the, so I gotta tell you, it's not really my problem. If I can, if it makes no difference, I'll do it. I mean, I'm not gonna not do it just out of spite. But if all things being equal, I would. But that's my feeling. trying to think if I have. I might have, and I might have done things like that in the past. I think I have like on a bus, or like on a train in Israel, like on a short, like 15, I have no issue. I'm not gonna, but on a 12-hour flight, I'm not gonna sit in the other seat. Yeah, I'm not gonna deal. Yeah, but for 5 minutes, of course I'm gonna do that, but not for a 12-hour, 15-hour flight. I'm not gonna sit in the seat that I don't want to sit in. So, whatever. Look, it's I understand it. There's a logic to it, which is, again, you're going to prevent yourself from doing something that's very serious, which is committing adultery is a serious, serious problem. It destroys people's lives. I understand, but you don't want to do it, right? And so what happens to you if you do it? You go to hell. I mean, that's what it basically just said. So now we're seeing things that we didn't see this in the Torah. We didn't see this in the Torah where it says you inherit hell, which is what the word Yoresh means, which is why it's translated as there.
But Bill says, we don't believe in hell.
Well, that's what you start to see in the Talmud, right? This is what you start to see in the rabbinic literature, references to the world to come, which we'll see throughout Pirke Avot. We'll see references to the world to come. And that's why when we talk about where here it says, receiving a reward, maybe the reward is the world to come. This is the first times that we start to see this in Jewish literature, words like Gehenom or Olam Haba, the world to come. So you don't want to inherit hell. You don't want to be going to Gehenom. But if you look at what you do, you limit that. Now, before, again, the women here get really upset, actually, I'm going to tell you something that can make you more upset. Remember, he's not just telling you not talk to strange women that are not, that are not your wife. Don't really talk to your wife either. That's what it says. Regard to one's own wife. Engage not in too much conversation, even with your own wife. Look at this. Phyllis just. So, look, there are people who honestly believe that this is a rule, that this is a rule to follow. That they don't engage in meaningful discussion with their spouse, or I don't say meaningful, but normal discussion. I was going to say unmeaningful discussion with their. It's not like they don't talk to their spouse, but how much of I didn't want to say that, Phyllis, but how much of my discussions with my wife are meaningless, but they're very meaningful to her. But I will tell you, yes, we don't want to say that they're meaningless or never want to use that. That term for the discussions that we're having. But yes, he says it's with your own wife too. Because again, if you're not supposed to do it with your own wife, how much more so someone who's not your wife? Because then you're not only taking yourself away from the study of Torah, but you're also winding up there. So no matter what, talking with your wife is taking you away from the study of Torah, which is what we're starting to see too, emerging in this, is that there's something to study. Did the priests think that this was something to study? Or was it just literally, this is what the sacrifices were supposed to do? But the fact that we are supposed to study Torah and doing stuff that takes us away from that is a waste of time, is definitely been part of the Jewish understanding of what we're doing right now is, which is that this isn't a hobby. This is what we're actually supposed to be doing. The rest of the stuff is hobby. The rest of the stuff, talking with your wife, that's the stuff that you get to do for fun or for a hobby. That's what you get to do when you're not doing the work. This is what you're supposed to be doing all the time, which is studying. So this is what they really are saying. Neglecting the study of Torah, that's really a problem. So again, taking those kinds of things out of our lives as much as possible, limiting those things that take us away from that. I will tell you, there are people right now, today, right now, this moment, thousands of them, who had a discussion with their wife today and said to them essentially, you are taking me away from the study of Torah right now. And ended the conversation. Ended the conversation. I'm not saying I've ever said that. I don't think my wife would let me get away with that. But I would say that some people, they use that as a daily answer. And it's not just that, right? They understand that women are important in the house. They take care of their kids. And there's a lot of important things that they do. But to engage in conversations with their wives regularly is not something that they necessarily would see as important. They would not see that communication is something that we need to work on. That would not necessarily be part of the discussion. It doesn't mean that Hasidic couples or religious couples don't go into therapy. They do. They definitely don't want to encourage divorce. And so there are Hasidic counselors, there's Orthodox counselors that do nothing but work with Orthodox clients. But at the same time, there is definitely an undercurrent, especially in really, really Torah observant and Torah studying communities, whether it's in Lakewood, New Jersey, or whether it's in Yerushalayim, that there are places where the focus is on study and really limiting the amount of outside distractions. And there are people who do this. This is their lives. This is not a joke for them. This is not a hobby for them. They believe that every moment that they're not studying Torah is taking them away from what they're put on this world to do. I can tell you that, again, it's a very different approach to it than necessarily you and I have, but it is part of that is part of the mentality. And understand that if you were raised in that mentality, every moment that takes you away from that is not time well spent. There's a lot of people. There was a lot of people, not everyone throughout history, not every Jew who was Orthodox throughout history had this interpretation, but there were a lot of people who did, and there are a lot of people who do now. And some people would say that it is a testament, especially in Israel, to the level of safety and security and the attention or the desire to have this amount of study that, again, that allows hundreds of thousands of Israelis to engage in this kind of study instead of working or serving in the army or doing other stuff. But this is an argument or discussion or a difference of opinion that Israelis have right now. So this is where we're going to leave it today. Let's read one more. I know it's a little over, but just finish with this because I don't want to end with "Don't talk to women," because someone's going to say that's what I said. No, Yoshua ben Parachia and Nattai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. And again, we're getting into the pairs. We're getting into the zugot, the pairs of teachers. But we're going to read this one right now. Yoshua ben Parachia used to say, "Appoint for thyself a teacher." Get yourself a teacher, right? Oselecha rav. Get yourself a teacher. Get yourself a companion, a chaver, right? A friend, a colleague. Probably more likely also a study partner, right? A chaver. The word chavura, right, is your colleagues. And judge all people. I wouldn't translate it as a man. It's Adam, a human being. Judge all people with the scale weighted in their favor. And that's the kind of aneclectic we like to finish with. We like to remind people, right? Just and that's even a better one than like walk a mile in their moccasins, right? Because that's a good one. Walk a mile in their moccasins, right? That's always been a good one. But this one, exactly. And I don't want to walk in anyone else's shoes, by the way. I don't know whether they're clean. I don't know. That's kind of gross. It's not a great image.
No, it's not.
I know it's not literal, but I don't need the image. This one is beautiful because it's actually telling people, just assume, just give them the benefit of the doubt. As just assume that. Yeah.
Our study partners.
Yeah, that's true. We're chaver. So this is important. Yeah, and it's important to have a colleague, but it is very important for people to have colleagues, to have a partner.
I have had a solo, and it's been lovely.
Yes, but I will tell you that a colleague, a study partner, or what we call a chavruta, a study partner, is very important. So whether it's your spouse nowadays, or whether it's a friend, or whether it's somebody who you can study with, it's very important to have somebody you can bounce ideas over. And a chavruta, this idea of having a study partner, going back to Yentl, was very important because Yentl, right, is a story of Mandy Patinkin's character and Yentl and Barbara Streisand, that they're so close that they have an intimate relation. They have a desire for intimate relationship. Isaac Bashevis Singer wrote that story because the relationship between chavrusa, between these men, was oftentimes so deep that it bordered and it was almost romantic. We have to understand that the relationship that somebody had studying with somebody for 10 years or more, these were relationships that people had that were deeply personal. So
But there's a prayer that you say during Mincha, Erev Shabbat, that ends with 3 verses that are very sexual in terms of relationship with God.
yeah. Does
Thanks, Jesse.
so I mean, that's all, we can get to that too, but this is one again of understanding that having a colleague, having someone you can bounce ideas off of, is so important in Jewish tradition. You have to have somebody that you discuss this stuff with, because it sharpens our understanding, it sharpens our ideas. There you go.
Yeah.
And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be intellectually engaged. And this is one of the things that Judaism has always stressed. It's one of the secrets to our religion. And it really is something that I'd like to see. Yes. And I'd like to see, it's one of the things I really was hoping to do. And maybe I'll have the ability to do this down the road. If God willing, we get the school open in Arizona, which we're hoping in the fall, that I would like to see American students, not just Jewish students, but American students be able to be engaged in a chavrusa study, in colleague study, which some schools in Japan, and I believe Korea too, have tried to institute colleague study. They definitely are trying it in Asian schools. This idea of having a colleague or study partner who becomes the person who sharpens your knowledge and your ability in a way that a teacher can't do, in a way that a classroom can't do, but to have a study partner that you have a relationship with and you have a responsibility to, that they're counting on you. It's like a lab partner, right? When you had a lab partner, remember those days you had a lab partner and you both were supposed to do work. And of course, you always wanted to get a lab partner who was really smart, right? That would do all the work. But yeah, but you gotta do it. Yeah. You got to learn with somebody, and that responsibility is something I'd like to see American students have too, because we know that, we have a lot of weaknesses, but one of the easy ways to cure it is to have people have a relationship with somebody that they have responsibilities to, create better idea of like social dynamic. We have too many kids who are learning by themselves, who don't have real relationships with human beings. Can you imagine if they have study partners that they're responsible for, that they have a relationship with, that they have an engaged relationship, just to have a relationship with somebody. And in Asia, it's been critical because a lot of these families, not just in China, but in other places, these are kids who are raised in they're single children. They have no siblings. And they don't understand what it's like to have somebody that they have a responsibility for. It creates a society of intense selfishness and difficulty of normal social behavior, social interactions that we learn from siblings. We learn so much we don't even realize from the relationships we have with our siblings. And so these type of relationships are so important. And I think that, like we've lost that idea of having a chaver, of having a colleague, but it's really important. And so with that, again, thank you everybody for being here for the beginning of Pirke Avot.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next year. We'll be off for the next.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Unless you come to our.
Thank
party.
you, Rabbi.
Those for far
Thank
away,
you so much.
we'll have a toast to you instead. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy
Happy
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah.
Bye, Joyce.
Love you.
Bye.
Miss you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. What?
I said, I'll see you tomorrow, but have a great trip.
I know. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I know.